On this Monday night, we're learning more politicians left the country over the holidays. The fallout for public figures who took trips abroad while Canadians were told to stay home.
It just scares me how out of touch with the people that they are.
Hospitalizations rising.
It's a dangerous trend.
Bracing for a post-holiday spike in infections in COVID-19 hotspots. Plus, the Great British Lockdown.
I'm afraid you must once again stay at home.
Another round of strict orders in the UK as cases soar out of control. And dropping the puck on another pandemic hockey season. Canada's NHL teams get ready to face off in a new division.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. After a tough winter break for so many Canadians, the backlash is building against politicians who flouted public health advice to avoid travel. Across the country, the list of provincial and federal politicians who left Canada over the holidays is growing. In Alberta tonight, there is major fallout. Premier Jason Kenney says United Conservative MLA Tracy Allard has resigned from cabinet. She went on a family vacation to Hawaii. The Premier's Chief of Staff, who traveled to the UK, has also resigned, and 5 other MLAs have been demoted. At first, Jason Kenney said he had no plans to sanction any members of his government for traveling. As Heather Yourex-West reports in tonight's top story, he underestimated the public outrage.
For 9-year-old Braden, a Hawaii vacation would have been a trip of a lifetime.
Braden loves the ocean, has always loved the ocean. Even before he was crawling, he would lay on the sand and just roll and laugh uproariously.
Braden has a rare genetic disease and isn't expected to live to see his teens. The Make-A-Wish Foundation was going to make Hawaii a reality until COVID-19 took that wish away. So when his mom first heard about the Alberta politicians flouting COVID travel restrictions to jet off to Mexico and Hawaii, she was hurt.
It was a kick in the teeth. I couldn't believe it. To know that they're basically thumbing their noses and maintaining their own family traditions to go to Hawaii was just over the top. I spent Christmas alone.
At first, Alberta's premier blamed himself for members of his own government taking trips.
And here I take responsibility for not having clearly set out or communicated a policy against international travel for senior decision makers in government.
But the outrage grew, forcing the premier to do an about-face. On social media, Jason Kenney revealed that 6 United Conservative Party MLAs were demoted and his chief of staff has resigned. By traveling abroad over the holidays, Kenney said, these individuals demonstrated extremely poor judgment.
It's a bit too little too late. We often see situations where you don't make the right decision at the right time. You wait, then you make it, but it's too little and it doesn't stop the masses.
There are concerns the actions of government officials have now set a dangerous precedent.
When everyday Albertans are seeing that ministers are traveling, their first response may be, well, why don't I just have a few people over to my house? Or do I really have to wear this mask? Do I really have to stay at home if I have a small tickle in my throat?
The premier will have to test public confidence in his authority very soon. The province is set to review its current round of COVID restrictions next week. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
It's not just provincial politicians who've traveled outside Canada during the pandemic. The federal Liberals say 2 of their MPs went to the U.S. Kamal Khera for a memorial service and Samir Zuberi to see a sick relative. New Democrat Nikki Ashton was stripped of her critic roles after she revealed she went to Greece to visit her sick grandmother. And Conservative MP Ron Leipert says he's been to Palm Desert, California twice since March for what he called essential house maintenance issues. David Akin has been tracking the fallout from these travels. David, now we're learning another Conservative MP and senator were out of the country. How's the party handling that?
That's right. And the senator in this case is Don Plett. And Senator Plett is the Conservative leader in the Senate. He went to Mexico on December 28th, then thought better of it, turned around and came back on the 31st. He's now quarantining at his home in south of Winnipeg. But we also learned that a Conservative MP from Ontario, David Sweet, also traveled to the U.S. and, like his caucus mate Ron Leipert, Sweet left to attend to a property issue, but then he stayed on to holiday, and he did that without notifying his party. And so as a result, Sweet like the two Liberal MPs and the NDP MP, has lost some of his parliamentary duties. In Sweet's case, he has resigned as chair of the House of Commons Ethics Committee. Now, we're learning about these because the leaders' offices from all parties here in Ottawa have, in the last few days, put the word out that any MP who left the country should step forward and step forward now. Now, all the parties, Liberals, Conservatives, New Democrats, and the Bloc Québécois, now say that they are confident that it is just this group of 5 MPs that left Canada in December. Senators, they're a bit of another matter because party leaders have less control over them. And for the record, both Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Opposition Leader Erin O'Toole spent the holidays with their families at their official residences right here in the national capital. And the PMO says no cabinet minister has left the country since March, with the exception of the Foreign Affairs Minister, who did leave Canada, but only on official government business. Now, in the meantime, dozens of MPs are proactively disclosing that they did not travel. In fact, some tell me they have been responding to calls from constituents wanting to know what they did for Christmas and where they were. Now, the second thing, Robin, we may have a federal election this year, and any candidate that wants to run always goes through a vetting process that's run by party headquarters. Well, this year, candidates can expect more than just a financial or a criminal background check. Candidates are going to be asked, when did you last leave the country and why? Robin?
David, how does this put politicians under more public scrutiny than ever before?
The concern now is that trust in politicians, federal or provincial, has been eroded by the actions of those that traveled for what are clearly non-essential purposes. I mean, to grab some sun in Las Vegas or Hawaii or the Caribbean. And their travel puts any legitimate international travel of other politicians in a bad light. And that, in turn, is going to make it more difficult when the Prime Minister or Premiers have to ask Canadians for more sacrifices to fight this pandemic. Robin?
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. A member of Quebec's Liberal Party has been punished for spending his Christmas vacation in the Caribbean. Pierre Akin has been stripped of his shadow cabinet positions in Quebec's National Assembly. His party ordered him to return home last week after it emerged he was on holidays in Barbados. Akin says he regrets his decision to travel and will remain in quarantine for 14 days. In Saskatchewan, MLA Joe Hargrave has resigned from cabinet. He revealed last week that he traveled to Palm Springs, California on December 22nd. He says he went to finalize the sale of a personal property. Residents at Montreal's Maimonides Geriatric Centre will have to wait a little longer for the second dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Residents at the facility were among the first in Quebec to get their first shots 3 weeks ago. They've now been told the second round is delayed. The province has instead decided to inoculate as many people as possible with a first dose. Pfizer and partner BioNTech are warning they have no evidence their vaccine will continue to protect against the virus if the booster shot isn't administered within 21 days. And today in Ontario, a personal support worker became the first in the province to get that second shot and be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 4 of her colleagues were also inoculated. Ontario recorded a staggering 3,270 infections today. In Toronto alone, 917 cases were reported. And today, new lockdown measures took effect, aimed at curbing the spread of the virus in workplaces. Among the changes, Toronto Public Health will begin sharing specific information on workplace outbreaks without compromising privacy, including at grocery stores and offices. Businesses must also immediately notify public health about 2 or more positive cases. And employers must minimize cases where more than one person travels in a car for work-related reasons. Ontario and Quebec are the 2 provinces driving Canada's rise in infections. This country has now surpassed 600,000 cases of COVID-19. And with hospitalizations surging, health officials are warning anyone suffering from COVID fatigue to take the pandemic seriously. Here's Eric Sorensen.
The coldest time of year is just beginning, but COVID-19 has a big head start on the peak season for virus transmissions. Over the holidays, there was a surge in travel and family gatherings, and hospitals are seeing a worrying increase in COVID admissions. Nationally, hospitalizations have risen to just over 4,000, higher than at any time since the pandemic began. Some hospitals are running out of capacity to care for those who need it most.
It's a dangerous trend if we keep seeing hospitalization rise. It's a dangerous trend if we keep seeing intensive care occupancy rise. And that's why we really called so strongly for the lockdown before Christmas.
But many Canadians did not lock down before Christmas. The leading indicators for hospitalizations are the case numbers. Confirmed cases far exceed what was counted last spring, now averaging over 6,000 per day. But it's not progressing evenly across the country. In BC, Manitoba, and the Maritimes, cases peaked primarily in late November, then dropped off. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador saw numbers peak in early and mid-December. The most troubling numbers are in Ontario and Quebec, where cases surged last month and have continued to rise. It's not clear when it will peak in the two biggest provinces. Many Canadians took precautions, but the holiday surge isn't fully accounted for yet.
The numbers have gone up fairly aggressively over the holiday season, and people, I would think, have not maintained total vigilance in that regard.
Toronto alone reported more than 900 new cases.
The new cases we are seeing today are likely the result of transmission before Christmas. Even when we all stay home as much as possible, it takes weeks to see the results of our collective sacrifice.
Ontario has reported 3 new cases of the highly contagious UK variant, one more reason to fear a coming surge. The message: stop traveling.
I cannot emphasize how important this is. COVID-19 does not know borders.
Now that the holidays have passed, health officials hope Canadians will take even more seriously the need right now to avoid non-essential travel and non-essential contacts. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
By the time most Canadians settled back into their workday today, Canada's top CEOs had already made what the average person makes all year. In 2019, the average total compensation for the 100 highest paid chief executives in Canada was $10.8 million. The average annual salary for a Canadian worker that year, just over $53,000. Early estimates for 2020, a year when most struggled financially, show that roughly half of Canada's top paid CEOs will likely keep or even increase their compensation levels. More than a third of the CEOs on the list work for companies that received the emergency wage subsidy. The good news and the bad news in Britain. Coming up, a new vaccine rolls out as the country goes into another lockdown. Plus, WikiLeaks founder avoids extradition for now. Faced with a surge in COVID-19 cases, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced another lockdown in England, similar to the one in March. People can only leave home for essential reasons, and all schools will be closed. Redmond Shannon reports on the dire situation.
A bright start to the day in the UK. The cheaper and easy-to-store Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in use for the first time anywhere.
Well done.
But the reality of the pandemic here remains.
I do want to stress for everybody the efforts that we're making as a government to try to keep primary schools open.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson is battling a crisis and the more contagious UK virus variant that experts say is out of control.
The virus is just going to get a tighter and tighter grip on communities right across the country. And vaccination is not going to come quick enough to help us.
The country's chief medical officers demanded immediate action.
I am more concerned about the situation we face now than I have been at any time since March last year.
Scotland's First Minister imposed a legally enforceable stay-at-home order for January, coming on a day when one of her own MPs was arrested for using public transit while she was knowingly infected with COVID-19. By evening, the Prime Minister issued similar orders for people in England.
We must therefore go into a national lockdown.
Already rolling back on his morning optimism when it comes to education.
Primary schools, secondary schools and colleges across England must move
to remote provision from tomorrow.
Suddenly, it feels like March 2020 again. Johnson hinted that this lockdown is expected to last well into February or even March 2021, pending a very rapid vaccine rollout.
I know how frustrated you are, and I know that you've had more than enough of government guidance about defeating this virus.
As for the rest of the UK, Wales had already issued a stay-at-home order since Christmas. Northern Ireland is now looking to do something similar. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Still ahead, the president's new efforts to defy democracy. In the U.S., voters are getting ready to head back to the polls in Georgia for two key runoff races that will determine who controls the Senate. But President Donald Trump is more fixated on his own loss in that state as a last-ditch attempt to overturn the election veers into dangerous new territory. Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Proskow reports.
This is all easily provably false, yet the president persists.
Officials in Georgia are at wit's end, once again forced to defend the integrity of the election after repeated baseless attacks by the president and his allies.
They're making wild claims that, again, undermine people's faith in the system.
On Saturday, the Secretary of State got an earful during a phone call from an angry President Trump who pressured him to overturn Joe Biden's victory in the state.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state, and flipping the state is a great testament to our country.
The call is remarkable, not just for its seeming abuse of power or disregard for democracy, but because it shows the president's genuine belief in debunked internet conspiracy theories about voter fraud.
I won this election by hundreds of thousands of votes. There's no way I lost Georgia. There's no way.
The data that he has is just plain wrong. He had hundreds and hundreds of people he said that were dead that voted. We found 2.
To date, none of the voter fraud claims have held up.
We've seen in the last 2 months unprecedented allegations of voter fraud.
That hasn't stopped Trump's Republican enablers from pushing the theories anyway. On Wednesday, at least a dozen Republican senators and more than 140 members of the House will use that as a pretext to object to President-elect Joe Biden's win during the count of the Electoral College votes.
And I promise you, come this Wednesday, we'll have our day in Congress. We'll hear the objections. We'll hear the evidence.
Even Trump loyalists have warned it's a risky strategy that could divide the party and undermine democracy. Election officials in Georgia have already warned all those false claims of voter fraud risk turning off Republican voters ahead of Tuesday's Senate runoff elections in the state. The pressure campaign may also be legally risky for Trump. Democrats have sent a criminal referral to the FBI, while back in Georgia, state officials have not ruled out a criminal probe into whether Trump broke the law by demanding an election result that simply doesn't exist. Robin?
Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. A big victory today for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. A judge in the UK has ruled he will not be extradited to the U.S. Cheers erupted outside the court today when the ruling came down. Assange has been held in a British prison for more than 18 months. Before that, he spent 7 years in asylum at Ecuador's embassy in London. American prosecutors indicted him on 17 espionage charges and 1 charge of computer misuse. They stem from publications of leaked military and diplomatic documents a decade ago. Today, the judge said Assange would be a suicide risk if held under harsh U.S. prison conditions.
We are pleased that the court has recognized the seriousness and inhumanity of what he has endured and what he faces. But let's not forget, the indictment in the U.S. has not been dropped.
Assange's lawyers say if convicted, he stands to face 175 years in an American jail. The U.S. government says it will appeal today's decision. Up next, Canada's hockey teams gear up for another pandemic season with only each other. All right, if you're a hockey fan, don't despair. The season is just over a week away. There may not be as many games as normal, but is anything normal these days? As Mike Armstrong explains, the creation of a new division will involve a lot of action between Canadian teams.
It's not lost on the players what their return to the ice means. For sports fans living in a pandemic, the NHL is a welcome distraction. The players feel the same way.
You know, I know for me, watching NFL games and having things like that to look forward to sometimes takes you out of the reality of the world we're living in.
There won't be much regular about this regular season. First of all, it comes without a preseason. The first game the teams will play,
we don't have time to waste,
will count in the standings.
Every day, every drill is important. It's designed for something, and our focus has to be there right from the start of today, right till game one.
Now, there won't be a bubble this season. Teams will be playing home games at home. But the NHL has divided the league into 4 new divisions, and the Canadian teams will only play each other. That means the Montreal Canadiens, for example, will play the Vancouver Canucks more times this season than they have in the last 5 combined.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting for everybody. Obviously, playing the same teams over and over, it's going to get heated at some points.
Where teams usually have the chance to cool down after a tough game, this year they're likely to go right back at it. To cut down on travel and the possibility of spreading the virus between teams, the league's borrowed from baseball. They're going to be playing multiple games against the same team. At one point, Montreal plays Ottawa 4 straight. Despite that, the new configuration does mean extra strain for the Canadian teams.
We're in the division that travels the most of all the divisions in this league this year. We're going from one end of the country to the other.
The NFL wrapped up its regular season Sunday. There were hiccups, but they did get through without any cancellations. That bodes well for the NHL.
Every sport is taking best practices from the other sports, and it's good to see that the commissioners are all talking to each other, sharing that intel.
Now, ratings were weak for last year's NHL playoffs. Playoff hockey in August was perhaps not a natural sell. The hope is if this season wraps up as scheduled, next season could start at the normal time of the year, the fall, possibly post-pandemic. Hopefully. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Monday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is the Yukon River in Whitehorse. We love seeing your part of the country, so email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.